Hello everyone. Thanks for being with me tonight. I'm Leonardo Cherici, the editorial director of Internazionale Post, and I want to say also on behalf of Giusy Criscuolo, our main director, that unfortunately she can't be here tonight. She's very happy to have you tonight with us, and she was looking forward to meeting you, but she's sure that this live is gonna be interesting. And just to introduce our guest, we have with us tonight Barçın. Did I pronounce it correctly? Okay.
Yes.
I asked Alvise earlier if that was the correct pronunciation. And she is a long-standing journalist covering international politics and foreign politics, of course, with a focus on Turkey. And tonight with us, she will discuss the latest news about the elections, some more insight about how these elections were seen inside Turkey, because we have only our European perspective. And then with Michele, there would be a little bit of debate about international relations and foreign policy after the re-election of Erdogan. Now I will just leave the word to Alvise. Alvise is one of our translator and author for Mondo Internazionale Post, and he will conduct the interview to Barçın. So Alvise, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Barçın, for having with me tonight. I would like to start our interview by asking first about these elections, about the outcomes, of course. Many European and international media have indeed titled these Turkish elections as the most important of 2023, emphasizing those polls that were emphasizing the strength of the opposition and the unity of the opposition, guided by Kılıçdaroğlu, and the great chance that there was to overthrow Erdoğan. Unfortunately, the result since the first round was quite neat, as Erdoğan gained 49.52% of the votes, while Kılıçdaroğlu stopped at 44 and 82. So is this a result that Turkish analysts and journalists that are covering Turkish politics since a long time were expecting, or was this also a surprise for them?
Well, first of all, obviously, before the elections, the pollsters were giving a slight lead to Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, to the opposition leader. The experts and journalists were a little bit divided in two. Some were a little bit skeptic, the others were hopeful. The problem with the Turkish mainstream media is that the mainstream media is 90%, 80% dominated by pro-government media. And the rest of the so-called opposition media or independent media, let's say, it is also a victim of polarization in Turkey. Therefore, especially the media that covered the opposition, they felt because of this polarization, I think they have also fall on the trap a little bit of wishful thinking. I think they also played in pumping up the expectations. As I said, this is unfortunate, the result of the polarization in Turkey, the result of the polarized press in Turkey. Unfortunately, the members of the independent or so-called opposition media, when there is such a huge mainstream media with such a huge government propaganda, this forces the so-called independent and opposition media to be obliged a little bit to be supportive of the opposition, therefore to sometimes lose their objectivity, to become a little bit more subjective, and therefore I think they have also played a bit of a role in pumping the expectations and the optimism. And at the end of the day, obviously there has been certain issues which the electorate did surprise, but maybe if some of the journalists and some of the experts had not fallen on the trap of wishful thinking, maybe it would have been easier to see that the expected result has not happened. But let me underline one issue, though. Mr. Erdoğan has lost in major big cities. And Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu came ahead in extremely big strongholds of the AKP in Istanbul. Therefore, of course, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu has lost. That's a fact. But in very big cities, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu had a lead.
Yes, yes, I understand. And in your opinion, also, so I would say that in many forecasted that the election of the 6th February, sorry, the earthquake on the 6th of February could significantly damage Erdogan's electoral run due to its ties, especially with the construction business. So, but not only won the elections, but also in some of the electoral councils in the region hit by this earthquake, he also won. So the question here is, how did he manage to reinvent himself after the earthquake, and how do you explain this? The great support, despite the great social and economic challenges that Turkey is now facing.
First of all, out of the 11 provinces that were affected by the earthquake, at least 10 were extremely big strongholds of the AKP. Remember, I've told you in very big cities and in coastal areas, AKP is not as strong, but in rural parts of Turkey, AKP has always been very strong. And these 10 provinces are mostly in the east, southeast, rural provinces, and they are big strongholds of the AKP. And again, I have to come back to the polarization in Turkey. The polarization has become, in a way, like people are hanging to the political parties as if they are hanging to their football clubs. So imagine your football club has deceived you. For instance, let's say it has not managed to bring success or the assistance you needed. So you don't change your football team. So the polarization in Turkey in terms of political parties are like that. When some of the supporters of the opposition were complaining about that, I told them exactly the same thing. If these were cities, if CHP, let's say if the opposition was in control of the government, and if they had failed to bring assistance to the earthquake zone, again, the CHP people would have voted for them, because the two sides, they don't see each other as an alternative. They see each other as an existential threat. That's why, even if they are extremely deceived by their parties, they just cannot cross the line and vote for the other party. So one, this is polarization. Another issue is that had the earthquake not taking place, maybe the votes of the AKP, the ruling party, and the vote of Mr. President could have dropped. But when the earthquake hit, those who were affected by it, although they were extremely disappointed in the first days of the earthquake, looking to the future, they just could not trust that the opposition will come to their assistance. At the end of the day, they know President Erdoğan. They know that his success is mainly on the construction sector, because he's very proud of the construction he has done throughout Turkey. And they just said, well, if Erdoğan loses and if a six-party coalition wins, maybe there will be a chaos. And maybe we will not be a priority for them. Because when there is a transition, especially think about a transition of a government that was there for 20 years, changing to another system. The six-party coalition came with the promise of changing the system. So those hit by the earthquake, they said, wait, if there will be a transition, then we might be forgotten. We will not be the priority. And let's not forget that in all cases, sometimes the most fragile ones, the most vulnerable ones, they don't take the risk for a change.
Yes, that's correct. That's indeed logic. And talking about the support that Erdogan received during these elections, I would like to ask you questions about the support from abroad, from Turkish citizens who voted for this election from abroad. And looking at the votes came from Europe, especially from countries that have a notable Turkish minority, such as Germany or the Netherlands. We saw that many votes coming from these countries were supporting Erdogan's. So I would like to ask you, what is that keep these Turkish citizens, some of them also coming from those early immigration waves and known as Gurbetçi, that they are still voting for Erdogan? What?
Correct. As you have said, most of the older generations are the ones who have come in the 1960s and 70s, and most of them, they have come from the conservative rural parts of Turkey. And when they came to countries like Germany, Belgium, France, they have met a totally different culture. And when you meet a totally different cultures, sometimes you tend to become more conservative, you tend to become more closed up. And so in a way, these first waves and the second waves of migrants, instead of integrating, they just hang on to their conservative lives, to their cultures. And let's not forget, they were they were in German called Gastarbeiters. So under normal circumstances, they were supposed to go back. Therefore, perhaps these countries, these governments have not also made an effort to integrate them. So they started to live in ghettos because they were supposed to go back. But at the end of the day, they stayed and they became part of these countries' lives. Having said that, because an early integration effort had not started, they felt discriminated against. They had language problems, they had education problems, they were living in a culture that wasn't theirs. And in time, especially in the course of the past 20 years or 30 years, Islamophobia started to increase in Europe. Anti-immigration has started in Europe. So perhaps in the first 10, 20 years when they went there, they were invisible. They were not creating a problem. They were not seen as a threat. They were not even seen because they were living in ghettos. But in the course of the past decades, with the increase in anti-immigration, with xenophobia, with Islamophobia, they felt more and more discriminated against. Therefore, when they see Mr. Erdoğan, coming to Western capitals and bashing them, posing as a leader that is going, against them, conflicting with them, that sort of appealed to their pride. And second, when they come to Turkey for vacation and holidays, they see all these developments in Turkey, all these construction. They see the nice facade of Turkey. But since they don't live in Turkey, they do not make face to the daily difficulties in
They
Turkey.
don't experience the real life, the daily
Yes.
life.
And also, let's not forget that Mr. President has made it so that all the embassies in Europe, in actually 30, 40 years ago, these embassies and consulates, they were also not treating very properly these Gastarbeiters. They were creating difficulties. With Mr. Erdoğan, all the embassies and consulars, they are like really helping out, and they're trying to solve their problems, etc. And they have seen that difference as well.
Okay, yeah, that's very important to mention indeed. And it's a very interesting observation. I have one last question, very last, and it's about the young generation, because Erdogan has proudly reiterated throughout his campaign his mission to make Turkey a great power, as it is as it should be, its destiny. So the thing is that this last country depicts, in any case, a country which is profoundly divided, because also in vital matters such as economics, ideology, immigration, and also the respect for the republican institutions and their independence from the presidency. But in this clash, how young member of society position themselves?
Actually, going towards the elections, every research told us that the young people in Turkey were extremely unhappy. They wanted to leave Turkey. They had no hopes in terms of future, and therefore the opposition, in fact, became extremely lazy. And they said, "Well, if the research shows this, then they should vote. They would vote for us." And I don't think they have done their job in terms of appealing to the youngsters and addressing their concerns, coming with convincing plans for the future. Now, in my view, most probably, especially in the big cities, the reason why Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu received more votes than Mr. Erdoğan, probably this was because of the youngsters. But we were expecting nearly 5 million first-time voters. But these 5 million nearly 5 million first-time voters, they did not all go vote for Erdoğan. They did not made they did not bring victory. They did not go vote for the opposition. This nearly
That's
5 million. Because had they voted for, if the majority of these first-time young voters voted for Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, he would have won the elections. Let's not forget the difference is around 2.5 million.
Yes.
So what's the reason? As I said, the opposition just sit back and said, well, if they are so unhappy, they will vote for us anyway, because for 20 years they have only seen Mr. Erdoğan, so they would of course vote for change. So they were lazy, they didn't do much. Second, indeed, we have also lived the post-truth in Turkey. The propaganda machine of Mr. Erdoğan has factored in the youth who were, who were happy to see that Turkey had started to produce some drones, that Turkey was posing as an important country, that Erdoğan was like a world leader. Therefore, I think the fact that the propaganda via the mainstream media, but also especially social media, we know that the government has used disproportionate resources compared to the opposition. Yes, I have been critical of the opposition, but I have to underline that, for instance, in Facebook, the amount of the propaganda which targeted the youth, especially the youth, on behalf of the government is disproportionate when you compare the use of Facebook, for instance, between opposition and the government. There is a big gap. So they have targeted specifically the youngsters, and they have tried to manipulate by, appealing to their pride, etc. And therefore, the youngsters have not voted overwhelmingly for Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, for the opposition.
Well, thank you very much for this insight view, and thanks a lot for your observations. I would like now to leave a moment the floor to Michele, and to switch a moment our focus from the elections and how they went and their results to the international reactions to the elections, and to see how Turkey's positioning will change or will not change. So, Michele, what do you think? What do you expect also?
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you, my colleagues, and Barçın Yinanç for this opportunity to exchange views. And I think the economic crisis has forced a pragmatic change, of course, regarding Turkish foreign policy. For example, over the past year, Ankara has drawn closer to the Arab monarchies of the Gulf, Riyadh in particular, and thanks to these improved relations, it has managed to obtain substantial economic aid from these actors, thus decreasing its dependence on the Western partners. However, it has had to sell off part of its infrastructure to these countries. And nowadays, it maintains a competitive partnership with Russia. While it supplies Kiev with weapons, it welcomes Russian tourists and capitals and mediates between the two belligerent parties. And considering the victory of Erdoğan, I think we will go on with the business as usual. And with the new cabinet taking office, there are three major interesting changes regarding foreign policy, I think. Hakan Fidan, the former head of the Turkish Secret Services, is the new foreign minister. Ibrahim Kalin, who until now served as the president's press secretary, and he was kind of a national security advisor, is now the head of the Turkish Secret Services. And the chief of the general staff of the Turkish armed forces, Yaşar Güler, took the post of defense minister. So now Hulusi Akar is out. I think that we can have the most extremist figures have been ousted. I think, for example, the former Interior Minister Soylu, and then key seats are now filled with professionals with a more moderate profile. But we can, I think, there are two possible interpretations that explain these changes. One more optimistic and one more pessimistic. Regarding the more optimistic one, I think that Erdoğan now feels secure enough to dispense with the ministers whose primary function seem to be stoking polarization and waging cultural wars. And the more pessimistic one, which I tend to embrace, is that the president is only softening his regime's image as a tactical retreat, let's say, while his new ministers deal with the economic disaster he created. I think that it's probably that then in the future he will force this minister to follow his old ways, or he can will simply replace them whenever he considers their missions complete. I think that now there are more or less 5 foreign policy priorities for Turkey. The relationship between Russia and China, the relations with the Gulf Arab monarchies, the issue of the Syrian refugee, and the Sweden NATO's membership, and the reconciliation with President Bashar al-Assad. I think that Turkey maintains a strong economic relations with both Western countries and their geopolitical adversaries, so China and Russia. And I think that those ties are unlikely to change. And
Barçın, you were nodding before with this more pessimistic.
Yes, I would.
From
Yes.
Michele.
I would overall agree with his analysis. First of all, I don't think we will see major changes in foreign policy when we look at the actors. Because when you look at the actors, these are the same actors. They are just changing positions. At the end of the day, Turkey's Syria policy or Turkey's Russia policy were dominated not really by the foreign ministry, but it was dominated by the defense ministry and by the National Intelligence Agency. So, I mean, especially Mr. Çavuş, especially Foreign Minister Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu did not play a key role. The Foreign Ministry did not play its former importance in policy planning, policy making, and policy implementation. It was actually mostly the defense ministry, mostly the Secret Service, who were more important and key actors in some of the key issues, like Russia, like Syria, and so therefore, these are the same actors, who were there for the past 20 years. Now they are just changing with their places within the government. And I would agree with Michele that Mr. Erdoğan is not going to make he's not going to soften his tone. Yes, he sacked the interior minister, but one of the reasons for that is that because he was a potential rival, he was a potential future to head the ruling party, and the normalization he has seen the fact that the presence of the Syrian refugees is becoming a very costly issue for him domestically. So we can see that one of the most important priority in the next days to come is going to be Syria. Why? Because Mr. Erdoğan is already starting to work for the municipal elections, and he realizes that, again, let me underline it, he realizes that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu was slightly ahead of him in the big cities, and one of the reasons for that is, maybe the refugees who are visible in these big cities. But one of the reasons why he wouldn't soften truly his tone is that he has seen that the civil society mobilized behind the opposition, that thousands of people who were not party members, who didn't even like CHP, but just felt the need to support it because they don't want to Erdoğan, they mobilized, and thousands have gone to the ballot box, either to work as party officials or either as election observers. So for the first time, when the AKP officials went to the ballot box, they saw all these civilians, present there to keep to their votes so that their votes are not stolen. Indeed, in order to discourage these civilians, I believe Mr. President will not soften his tone, especially in terms of domestic politics. Now, as long as he doesn't soften his tone in terms of domestic politics and in terms of democratic reforms, relations with the West will remain as it is. Anyway, Western capitals are only interested by the migration issue. They're only interested by the war in Ukraine. They just don't want Turkey to tip the balance too much in favor of Russia. And at the end of the day, as Michele has said, the priority will be to have something tangible before municipal elections in Syria. Mr. Hakan Fidan had already started these negotiations. And again, as he has said, we have seen something unprecedented in these elections. Russia has interfered in a way to help Erdoğan because he postponed natural gas payment. But the Gulf countries as well, they have enabled the Turkish economy to take a breath by these swap deals. Therefore, Mr. Erdoğan obviously will continue these normalization and the dialogue with these Gulf countries. And as Michele had said, Syria and Russia will remain important priorities in the short term.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all this interesting observation, Michele and Barçın. And yes, Leonardo.
No, I would like just to say a few things because it was very interesting, and especially we can see so many common patterns among between Turkish elections and also what is going on with Europe, especially when you refer to the fact that there is this huge polarization and people are just supporting a political party like if it's a football team. And for example, I was one maybe with a wishful thinking about that since Turkey faced a huge economic crisis with the bank, etc. I was thinking, okay, maybe this thing would be an important demand for change because that's more or less what happened in Italy in 2018 after several years of crisis. The party that was in power got defeated because people were tired of the so-called establishment. So I was expecting something different, but you were super clear to explain what are actually the underlying reasons for why Erdoğan won again this time. And the only last question that I would like to ask, it's about maybe the relationship with the European Union, because we wrote a lot about it and we heard a lot about it. And of course, I can say that probably the vast majority of European leaders were expecting the opposition to win, and but they immediately then congratulated with Erdoğan, and so my question is how this relationship, they're gonna go worse or they're gonna keep on the same way?
Leonardo, let me just say two issues about the economic crisis.
Mhm.
One is that the opposition has not seen that the economic crisis had not taken a toll. In other words, in 2001, 2008, people felt the economic crisis because there was mass layouts. People have lost their jobs, so they really felt it. But Mr. Erdoğan was extremely clever to come with pay rise. Okay, as I said, thanks to Russian assistance, thanks to the Gulf assistance, the more the inflation went up, the more Mr. Erdoğan came with a rise of the minimum wage, for instance, at the expense of what? At the expense of leaving Turkish coffers empty. So he took that risk, and he also played to the fears. He said, if you don't vote for me, it will be the revival of terrorism. The opposition is siding with terrorism, and again we've seen the post-truth world in action in Turkey. Mr. President himself has confessed that the video footage he showed all over was actually fake. So these are also important inputs for the elections in the future in Europe. Unfortunately, we live in this post-truth world, and via social media, people are becoming under the propaganda of false news, and sometimes economic hardships, you have to analyze them, to what degree it is hurting. Sometimes people complain, but when they go home, actually they have something to eat. I mean, I'm just simplifying it. But if somebody loses a job in the household, then this becomes a huge problem. So the hardships of the economic problems need to be well analyzed as well. Those who felt the economic hardships, they were the doctors, engineers, they were the middle and upper class. These classes are already voting for the opposition. But those who were voting for the AKP, they got assistance over and over again. So he made sure that his own voters were not affected. As to the European Union, I don't think the relationship will change. Transactional relations will continue. Honestly, I think some of the people in Western capitals were a little bit happy, because if the government had changed, Turkey would have gone back to democracy, and this would have meant that Turkey could have come back to Europe saying, I want a more a diversified type of relationship. Maybe again, in the fears in Europe about Turkey becoming a member would have revived. As long as Mr. Erdoğan is there, everybody knows Turkey will never become a member. So you can sit down and be comfortable. Of course, Mr. Erdoğan is a troublemaker. He doesn't always share the same rhetoric, share the same vision. And since they don't trust Mr. Erdoğan, since they don't speak the same language with Mr. Erdoğan, I have the feeling that the relations between Europe and Turkey will remain transactional. The relations with the EU are on ice anyway, but relations with Western capital will be on dialogue and cooperation on few issues. And in a way that they will, I think, Europe will try to control, damage control. They will try to make sure that Erdoğan is not creating trouble in all the issues. Therefore, I am expecting that the relationship will remain transactional. It will not expand to other areas where there are other areas Turkey could be an asset. Turkey and Europe could speak about Africa, cooperation in Africa, or climate change, etc. But there won't be. I don't expect an increased dialogue. The exception could be with Mr. Mehmet Şimşek, who is the economy minister. I am sure he would want the revival of the customs union because he wants to have more financial flow from Europe. But you cannot have revival of customs union unless you go back to democracy. And for the reasons I have said, I don't expect Mr. Erdoğan to reverse course, especially in domestic policies. But we will hear Mr. Mehmet Şimşek talking about, let's warm up the relations, let's warm up the customs union. But whether this will be realized, I am not so sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Michele, if you have something else to add.
I completely agree with what has just been said. I wish only to add only 2 points regarding domestic politics. These elections, I think, certify that the real veto player, the kingmaker of domestic politics, are not the Kurds, but the nationalists. Because nationalists position themselves across all the three alliances. We have the Meral Good Party, allied with Kılıçdaroğlu, and we have Bahçeli's party allied with Erdoğan, and then we have the third candidate, Sinan Oğan, who is an ultranationalist, and combined they vote. It's worth more or less 1/4 of the vote. Indeed, the Kemalist candidate during the campaign for the second round awkwardly tried to put a nationalist spin on his rhetoric, but then it failed to achieve a concrete result. And then I completely agree about the true explanation why the Anatolian heartlands voted for Erdoğan. And I think it's because of the historical trauma, because the conservative the conservative core of Turkish society will vote for nationalists and Islamists always, because they fear that the times of oppression could come back with the Kemalists getting to power. That's it.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you for all of you for being with us tonight. And it was a pleasure. It was very interesting, and I hope maybe we can do it again in a few months to see if our forecasting are correct or not. Thank you again, Barçın, for being with us, and have a lovely evening.
Grazie mille.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.